I have a son. I am Ivan, and I am a dad. The vet, who'd been hovering in a corner of the enclosure, turns toward me. I fall back on my rump. I stop breathing. Please don't let me pass out again. Kenyani nods as if to say, surprise. There in the vet's arms is a second baby gorilla, a girl, squirming and skinny and beautiful. Twins. I am the father of twins.
So, you just heard the amazing Newbery Award-winning author Katherine Applegate reading a brief excerpt from her brand new book, The One and Only Family. I just finished this book. I got my copy today, and I apologize to anybody I owe work to. You'll get it tomorrow. This book is fantastic. It was such a treat to get to catch up with Ivan and Ruby and Bob and the two twins. And it's such a moving story about parenthood and loss and love and hope. And I can't wait for you all to read it and to comment below about what you think about it. But now I want you to join me for the next half hour as we get a chance to talk with the amazing Katherine Applegate about the one and only family, about censorship, about hope, and about the power of storytelling. Join me for this adventure in learning. Welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. We are back with the one and only Katherine Applegate. This is a big week because this week you have the opportunity to celebrate the one and only Ivan's further adventures with the one and only family, which is out on Tuesday. So I'm so delighted to welcome Katherine as part of her book tour. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me and for having the dog sitting on my lap, who happens to be a bit of a snorter. So if you hear snorting, it's the dog, not me.
That's what they all say. So, Katherine, let's start with the one and only family. This is a big deal. This is sort of the culmination of 4 books that started with a gorilla in a shopping mall. What led to this fourth book?
I didn't think there'd be a second book. I really thought, I'd brought Ivan's story kind of full circle. And it's been such a delight to revisit these characters. They become friends, and you get to know them better and better, and you watch them grow up. Little Ruby, the elephant, is now, taking care of another baby elephant by the 4th book. And that's just, it's so delightful to see. But to go back and spend time in Ivan's point of view was really delightful, because he's aged himself, and he is now facing the prospect of parenthood in the form of twins. And it was a very bittersweet kind of right, because I had to think a lot about the difficulties we all face when we're parenting, how much truth to tell our kids, um, how much to let them grow up when they need to grow up. And so it was more complicated than I thought it'd be. I thought, oh, fun and games, 2 rambunctious toddler gorillas, but it turned out to be more than that.
And what are some of the life lessons that Ivan ends up imparting, if you can tell without spoiling the book?
Well, one of the big ones for him is realizing the sad truth that his toddlers will probably never be free, never see the wild in the way he briefly experienced it. And as I was writing it, I thought a lot about climate change and how we face problems like that with our kids, and question how much to tell them, and how hopeful to be. And so Ivan has to work through a lot of that. He also has this very complicated past. He lived in a mall circus for 27 years. How much of that do you tell your kids, and when do you tell them? So he parses it out. He starts out with little bits about Africa, and of course they're fascinated. Their mom, Kenyani, is a little more pragmatic, although she was captive born, so she didn't have that wild experience. And it was interesting. And then, of course, there's just, being a dad, the complications of being a dad. Turns out Ivan is a very good dad. The kids are The glossary, we always have a visual glossary at the beginning, and in this one, there are all these assorted toddler antics like bother father, where you get one on each shoulder and then just drive him nuts, asking annoying questions. So he's learning how to be patient, and fortunately for Ivan, that's not difficult.
Well, and you just said two things that I think are really interesting. One is figuring out revisiting Ivan's past because you
Mhm.
started grounded in a true story. Because you originally were based on the real Ivan, who we know ended up in the Atlanta Zoo and, as far as I'm aware, did not become a parent. And so you've been able to sort of take him on this journey into the what ifs. What if this could have happened? What if this could have happened? And I'm wondering, if did that give you more freedom in telling the story, sort of deviating from what happened to what could have happened?
That's a good way to put it, actually. It is a series of what ifs. Um, and the twin angle was interesting because the real Ivan might well have been a twin, and twins are not particularly common in Western lowland gorillas, but it happens. He was found with another infant gorilla, and we don't know. She appeared to be the same age. She could have been an orphan from another troop. And unfortunately, she passed away almost as soon as they got to Tacoma, Washington, because this horrific trip they'd been on. But that little tidbit, that possibility of twins in Ivan's past, gave me an excellent what if, an excellent opening to possibilities. And yeah, there's again, it's bittersweet to think this might have been for Ivan. He, as far as I know, was never a father. Kenyani is still alive, and the mom, the significant other, and she is at the Columbus Zoo now, as I understand it, and thriving. So I tried to take as many, facts as always as I could and blend them with the fiction.
Well, and I can't wait to read it. So let's talk a little bit about climate change too, because I think that's important. And I've noticed that it sort of makes its way through a number of your books. I just recently read Otter, and you can sort of see the impact of what we're doing in terms of the otter in Otter. You can certainly see the impacts of what we do in books like Wishtree as well. And so I'm wondering, how do we talk to kids about climate change? You've been grappling with that. What are some of the things that you're thinking?
I think it is incumbent on, well, I started to say all writers, certainly children's writers, to provide hope because we're giving these kids all kinds of problems to deal with, all created by the grown-ups in the world, and to show them strategies for resilience, I think is really important. I did this book called Willowdene that focused on a couple imaginary species that were interdependent and in rapid decline. And she kind of plays investigative scientist and figures out how and why that's happening. And that was interesting because there was this kid who was kind of ostracized and on the periphery of things and interested in creatures that weren't necessarily the cutest and cuddliest. And she just observes, and she is tenacious, and she speaks out, and she makes a change in this little community. And I think that's the kind of message you want to give to kids. I always tell them when I talk about Ivan that it was kids in part who got really mad about the way he was being treated at the mall and encouraged their parents to boycott it. And it took a long, 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 long time, but he was eventually released. So I think it's very important to give them hope and to show these little, it's, incremental. Otter, for example, is a good example because Monterey Bay otters, the population in the early 1900s were down to 50. And this, again and again and again, going back, these marine scientists and trying to find ways to preserve the species and save the kelp forest. And they're up to a few thousand now, and they are regularly raising orphaned baby otters and putting them back out into the wild. So change is possible. It's slow, but it's possible.
Well, and I think it takes that commitment to change and the recognition that we have to change in order to be able to bring these about.
Very good point. Very good point. I mean, that's half the battle right there, isn't it?
It is, and I think I told you last time we saw each other. When I was in Australia, we went to this tiny island called Phillips Island, which is right off of Australia and near Melbourne. And in the 1980s, there were maybe 5,000 little penguins left. And the little penguins are super cute. They're about this big and they're blue and white. And um, they had run out of space and time. The British had brought foxes in, and foxes are not natural predators in Australia. And so they had decimated the populations.
Ah,
There were also summer homes that were being built. And so, little penguins needed space to be able to burrow and
of
to lay.
course.
And it took this concerted effort led by the community, the government, the scientists, and I'm assuming the kids were part of it as well. And they bought up the properties that were on this one part of the island where the penguins were nesting.
Ah,
They converted it back to wild space, and over time, and it's been time, they got rid of the foxes, like they eradicated the fox population on the island. And they actually, I want the person's job who monitors, are there foxes coming onto the island over a bridge or something? But over time, there's now 20,000. No, I take that back. There's 40,000 little penguins
oh,
that,
isn't that amazing?
so we can do it. And I think it's those stories of hope that are so essential when we talk about something as difficult as climate change, because
Absolutely,
it's possible.
absolutely. And focusing, you're right, on these little moments that add up. It's kind of amazing how resilient nature can be given half a chance.
Right.
And to see that penguin population explode like that, I mean, that's just remarkable.
And it's super cool. So, do you have a passage from the one and only family that you are reading as you're going out and doing book tours, or something that you'd like to share?
Oh, sure. I just happen to have a book here. I do love this cover very much. They did
Beautiful.
such a good job. This is uh, Patricia Castelao. She lives, I believe, still in Portugal, and we've never met after all these 4 books. And I just think she does such a remarkable job. This is right as Ivan is dealing with his newfound fatherhood. Um, I see hay and fur, and then, yes, there she is, Kenyani, on her side, clutching something, licking it, sniffing it. It's a baby. It's an infant gorilla. It's a son. It's my son. I let out a noise. I don't know quite what it is or what it means, but it feels like it's coming from somewhere deep inside of me. Protect, it says, protect. Kenyani glances over for just a moment, as if it's painful to separate her gaze from the scrawny lump of life in her arms. Protect. I feel it like a surge of lightning, a river rushing. Protect. I am a silverback, and that is my job. I have a son. I am Ivan, and I am a dad. The vet, who'd been hovering in a corner of the enclosure, turns toward me. I fall back on my rump. I stop breathing. Please don't let me pass out again. Kenyani nods as if to say, surprise. There in the vet's arms is a second baby gorilla, a girl, squirming and skinny and beautiful. Twins. I am the father of twins.
Wow. And what a great segue in terms of getting people hooked and wanting to read more.
It was great fun to do research. You have not lived till you've spent millions of hours on the internet looking at videos of baby gorillas. They're just hilarious.
Well, that's a really good question. How did you do the research for this book?
I was lucky enough, although I never did meet the real Ivan, I have been lucky enough to become friends with his main caretaker and best friend, Jody Kerrigan, who is a primatologist at Zoo Atlanta. And last time I was there, she took me behind the scenes to see some of the babies. And you sat in this little special space, and they came right over to her, and they were absolutely obnoxious. It was so funny. They were pounding and, look at me, look at me, look at me, just like every 2 and 3 year old you've ever met. And so that was really glorious to be that close to them. And then, of course, there's all kinds of research online you can find. It's so much easier to do research now than it was, say, 20 years ago when I was writing Animorphs.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears. You had a really big week last week. You were in Floyd County, Virginia, because there had been a one school, one book read of Wishtree, and then something happened. Can you tell us a little bit about that event and what was going on?
Well, it was interesting. It was actually one district. So they'd had it for many years, and all the elementary schools read the same book, and then there are all kinds of activities associated with it. And by the way, I've had so many books, especially Wishtree and Ivan, used in that kind of context. And I think it's just the greatest idea because I wasn't much of a reader when I was young. And even if you don't like the books, it's such a great way to connect over reading and to share ideas and opinions and the crossing guard reads it and the lunch ladies read it, and it's really beautiful. So they had done this for quite a while, and they got about halfway through, and they suddenly just pulled the book without explanation. They had a regular reading schedule, and the families were reading at home, and they were about halfway through the book. And it turned out that someone who did not live in the county or even have a kid in the public school system was complaining about a short passage in the book that had to do with reproductive strategies of trees, which are, very uh,
Science?
complicated. To quote someone, botanist, in one of these articles that followed on, trees are kinky. They have, you can have a male and a female parts on the same tree. So anyway, I got into that a bit because the book is written from the point of view of a red oak tree. And this was apparently offensive to this particular parent, got picked up by other parents within the school system. And the school board it turns out, at least from what I'm told, had never encountered a challenge book before. I think very often for a lot of these school systems, that's part of the problem. There's no go-to methodology when somebody says, I'm not really comfortable with that book. So I offered to Zoom with the school board at their next meeting. I had a message prepared, and they wouldn't allow me to. So a wonderful parent stepped in and read it. And I made a little video for the kids that I put online, and it just sort of blossomed. And what I took from this was that a handful of parents can make a huge difference when these things happen, because a parent reached out and said, hey, want to come stay here? And another one got in touch with a local paper, and another one talked to the school board. And I ended up going there. And a lot of this was due to the wonderful support of my publisher, Macmillan, who was as incensed as I was. And I went, and we had events at the public library. And again, librarians are the best humans in the
They
world.
are.
This public library stepped up and said, hey, you can do it here. So we had one event, it sold out instantly. We added another one, it sold out instantly, and spent the afternoon and evening just talking to these great kids and teachers and librarians about the book. So it was very heartening, and I think it opened up a dialogue. There was one school board member there who came to talk to me, and I got the feeling that the ball is rolling anyway.
Well, that's good. And the irony of the whole thing is Wishtree is about welcoming people. And so the idea that you would launch a complaint against this book that is about being the welcomer to me just baffles my mind.
It was ironic, to say the least, and not lost on most people. And in fact, the library had a wish tree out in its front lawn, and I visited another local school that had used wish tree last year, and was having its second celebration of Wishing Day. And it just takes that tiny little bit of difficult humanity to make these problems happen. But it's amazing, if you fight back, that people really will listen, I think.
It really is.
So, and this was in microcosm, of course. It's much harder when you've got a huge school system and a lot of loud voices, but I think it can be done.
Well, and that experience, I think, is heartening to librarians and to those who are facing challenges, is to know that if you speak up, if you make your voice heard, then there is a way to combat sort of the noise that's out there, because it really is a very small percentage of
Oh,
people with
tiny.
these challenges.
Just
And
tiny. One of the lovely things was the public library had invited all the school librarians to come and had them stand up. And, you know, there was just riotous applause. And it was a reminder of how very, very important librarians are in all this process. First of all, they're the ones on the front lines. And secondly, they're trained to curate books. That's why we have librarians, to help us decide where they should go. And I said in my statement, and I really believe this, if you're a parent who doesn't want your kid to read a book, that's absolutely your right. But don't tell my kid what they can read.
that's 100% true. You know, I've thought about this because I spend my career advocating for books and the inclusion of multicultural books as we teach STEM and STEAM. But as a parent, there were certain books that I chose not to let my little girl
Mhm.
read. And it was largely because I couldn't stand having Eloise acted out in my house. My oldest child was such an empath that she became the characters. And as the mother of a 4-year-old, I decided that Eloise was my line. I just
Oh,
could not
that's
cross
hilarious.
that line. And I
I
love Eloise, and I never told anybody else they couldn't read Eloise. I just couldn't have her in my house.
I totally hear you. I've heard people say that about Junie B. Jones. I loved Junie B. Jones. I think it was hilarious, but I know that some parents were like, no, that's just a bridge too far.
Well, we had already spent a childhood where she was Biscuit, the dog. Do you remember Biscuit wants a cookie?
Yes.
She
Oh, we
slept
went
on
through a
my
biscuit
floor
phase.
for 2 weeks on a pack and play mat because she was Biscuit the dog.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah,
And I
we had a
felt
biscuit phase.
justified there.
Oh, absolutely. And see, that is your right. But
Exactly. But
yeah.
I would never tell anybody else you can't read Biscuit or Eloise.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I keep thinking we're past this phase and the banning is losing momentum, and it doesn't seem to be. What is happening is that people who had been kind of going, oh, this too shall pass, are realizing they have to step up and make noise again and again and again. And it's frustrating because parents are exhausted and they're
Right.
working 2 and 3 jobs and they have soccer practice to deal with. And the last thing you want to have to do is also fight book bans, let alone librarians who are, you know, overworked and underpaid. So, but I do think that's the way things are going. And also litigation is making a difference. I think it's scaring people.
Right. And so we know that, you know, Penn America has made a huge difference. And so is the ACLU in terms of doing that litigation and supporting librarians. And I think that's huge.
And the Virginia Library Association was really helpful. And VAASL, the Association of School Librarians in Virginia. And there's a new organization called Virginians in Defense of Libraries. And they were all wonderful.
So if you're facing somebody who's challenging, these are some of the really good organizations to be able to.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the ALA, the American Library Association, they're all out there making noise, which is so important.
Which means you're not alone. Just like we talked about with climate change and speaking up for the animals, you're not alone.
No, and that's really really important to remember because it can be isolating. It can be very. I know these parents I spoke to initially felt really alone. They assumed they were the only ones who were concerned, and it turned out no, quite the contrary. But you know, it takes a while to make all those connections.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the rock concert.
That is the thing
the remarkable thing about stories, when you find the right story, and this, by the way, is a cover of one of our beloved Mr. Schu's books, and it's absolutely amazing because it talks about how powerful stories are. Stories are how we understand the world. Stories are how we learn to be better human beings. And you are going to find the perfect book. Maybe it's not, this is a story. Maybe it's not The One and Only Family. Maybe it's not Charlotte's Web. Maybe it's a graphic novel. Maybe it's nonfiction or poetry. There's a book out there that is going to change your life. So hang in there, because I bet a whole lot of you are going to end up being readers.
Under that enclosure was a note that said, "Dear Mr. Schu, I hope you love the book of my heart." And I took that book and I took that note and I went over to that chair and I read and I read and I read. And this is what happened. I told you my favorite word is capacious, and I could feel my heart becoming more capacious, and I could feel my soul billowing out. And then, Olivia, I started to panic. And I was like, no! I need more words, Olivia! And I need more pages. So what do you think I did? Say your answer out loud. No. This is what I did. I put down the book and I went up those stairs, and at the top of the stairs was my bedroom. And I went into my bedroom and I got into my bed. And do you think I was able to sleep? No! Because what was I thinking about? So I got into bed and I went down those stairs and I sat in that chair on Periwinkle Lane with only 5 pages left. And I read 1 page. And how many pages did I have left? 4! And then I went upstairs, true story, and I got into my bed, and I said to myself, John Edward Schumacher, my legal name, you are ridiculous. And I got in bed, and I went downstairs, and I sat in the chair at 2224 Periwinkle Lane, and I finished reading the book August. And when I finished reading the book, I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And then this is what I did. I went into serious debt, because in 1 year, I bought and I gave away over 500 copies of the book that I read in that chair. Would you like to know the name of the book? I'm not going to tell you, because it doesn't matter. Would you like to know the name of the book? The book is called The One and Only.
Just got to hear a little bit of the rally for reading at Shenandoah University. When the kids hear you and John come in, you guys are like rock stars. And I know you had said at one point that you weren't a reader when you were a kid until you found Charlotte's Web. How do you encourage kids to have that kind of reaction and be that kind of reader?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of that is John Schu. He is just remarkable. If you haven't been lucky enough to see him in action, he just has this incredible ability to hone in on just the right kid and give them just the right book. And he'll be looking at, a sea of 800 smiling 4th grade faces and somehow still manage to do that. I think for me, it's really important for kids to understand that you don't have to like every book. You may have to read it in your classroom setting, but for some kids, it's a graphic novel. I like to mention Dog Man, and the kids just go insane. I love Dog Man. For some, it's poetry. For some, it's nonfiction. Everybody has a different way to fall in love with the written word, and they have to know that it doesn't always happen overnight. I love telling them that I was not much of a reader, because so many authors, are, and I think it makes you feel a little more comfortable with the possibility that it's a learned skill like anything. So I always say, talk to your mom and dad, talk to your librarian, talk to your teacher, talk to your bookseller, listen to your podcaster, and you'll find that perfect book that makes that difference in your life.
And the world of reading is such an incredible world to be a part of when you find that book that you fall in love with.
It is. It's a community, and you don't realize it until you're there.
I love that. So, my last really random question for you. You've got all these wonderful animal books. So many times an animal or a tree shows up as the lead character. Um, Tell us, are you an animalish person? Is it animals that move you? Are you going to be continuing to write about animals? And if so, what's the craziest animal that you would love to research?
Ooh, oh, where to even start? It's just endless. That was one of the nice things about Animorphs because we got to experiment with so many animals, but we didn't have the time to really, do the in-depth research that I've found is my favorite part of the whole thing. Yeah, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian when I grew up. I was sure. And in fact, in high school, I worked for a vet and loved it, but I was a lot more interested in the cognitive end of things and that chasm between us and them and how we perceive the world. And so that ended up leading me slowly but surely toward writing from the point of view of animals. It's really a tight wire act, though, because you're always being anthropomorphic. We're always guessing. We just don't know.
Right.
And so you can have very, Jack London on one end of things, and then you can have Dr. Dolittle on the other. And you have to kind of decide how much perception you're going to venture into. But boy, actually, the book I'm working on right now is features a cat, but also a couple stuffed animals. And I have never done sentient stuffed
Interesting.
animals before. All the same problems apply. How can they move? How much can they move? Can they talk? How much can they perceive? And you have to create these rules. It's like writing any fantasy, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess the closest you would have ventured with that would have been Crenshaw in terms of,
True.
are we an animal? Are we imaginary? You get to be the judge.
Yes, I hope I left that entirely ambiguous.
You did. And it was a good ambiguity.
Good, good.
Well, that sounds really interesting. And I know you're working on a sequel to Dogtown. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's coming out next September with the amazing Jennifer Choldenko, and it's so much fun. We got to tour together, and it was an absolute delight. I'm about to go on a solo tour now for family, and it won't be nearly as much fun.
I was going to say, it's got to be fun when you can tour with somebody.
Yeah, just to commiserate and share coffee.
Exactly. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for stopping in today. You all, I'm going to drop the link to get the one and only family, but you also should be on the lookout for the Dogtown sequel as well, and check out any and all of the other books. If you haven't picked up Wishtree, it's not too late. You should be reading that one too.
Thank you so much. I love chatting with you.
I love chatting with you too. Thank you.